make it a bright and a promising and an optimistic topic and not really leave it to the struggles, but from exclusion to entry. That's what I would like to focus on, that the women, the transition of women from exclusion to entry. The third will be the contemporary landscape of women, and not only the contemporary landscape of women in relation to courts, but also very important, legal education with regard to the legal profession, the judiciary and the academics. So I will first start with women in ancient India, and it was really, while I was doing a little bit of research for today's talk, over the last 3 to 4 days, I did not get much time because I was in Calcutta for the long weekend, came back to Hyderabad on Sunday night. So under the Vedas, so interesting because I also learned so many things. Under the Vedas, you had Lopamudra, who was a Rishika. And Mr. Srikant Reddy Garu actually mentioned the word Rishika in his speech, who was a Rishika, that's a female seer, and who was also known as Brahmavadini, and a woman of doctrinal authority. She was the wife of Agastya Muni, sage Agastya, and one of the 27 women credited as authors of the Veda, of the hymns in the Rig Veda. She established a female voice in formal debates when she and Agastya Muni, her husband, engaged in a proper rational debate known as Brahmodaya, which involved discussions about logic and desire of the human mind, desire of the human heart. And we also have, under the Vedas, Apala, who was a young woman and also a Rishika, and who wrote a hymn in the Rig Veda and addressed it directly to Indra the god, petitioning Indra for healing and justice of Apala, of herself, without a male intermediary. So the Vedas projected Apala as the first woman who directly prayed and petitioned, like a petition we file in court to Indra for her own salvation, for her health. And this was the first earlier form of an individual legal standing as we see today in courts. And prefigures also the concept of locus standi as we understand in under Article 226 of the Constitution. In all writ petitions, one of the first questions which is raised is, do you have locus standi to file the writ petition? Under the Upanishads, we have Gargi Vachat who was a philosopher scholar and participated in King Janak's, Raja Janak's great Brahma Sabha, or in other words, a philosophical assembly. And according to Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, she challenged sage, a very important Muni Rishi, in a public philosophical debate before a full assembly of scholars at King Janaka's court about a chain of logical questions and answers, pushing him to the limits of metaphysical knowledge. And this was the first instance of a cross-examination, as we see in any of the suit courts today in India. And this was also the first structured questioning with regard to burden of proof, who has the onus of burden of proof and who has to discharge that burden of proof. We come to the Ramayana. In Ramayana, you're all familiar with Ramayana and Mahabharata, but I just picked 4 examples, 2 from each. First of all, Sita's demand for due process. So after the fall of Lanka, when Lord Rama questioned Sita's chastity and questioned it in public before an assembled army and allies, rather than submitting, Sita delivered a structural rebuttal, and I'm deliberately using words which we are familiar in our courts now. So Sita delivered a structural rebuttal invoking her rights and her character as evidence and demanding that the ordeal be conducted in accordance with a proper due process. And she argues, Sita argues, that she cannot be punished on suspicion alone, but that she challenged Sri Ram to prove the accusation rather than a presumption of guilt on the part of Sita. We have the other example in the Ramayana, that is Tara. Tara's argument under unlawful combat, that is the Kishkinda Kanda, which we know, which we are all familiar with, when Bali, king of Kishkinda, is about to fight Sugriva, Tara intervenes. Bali's wife Tara intervenes and delivers a detailed strategic and legal argument against the fight, warning that it is being conducted unfairly and under improper conditions. Tara's challenge mirrors the principles of natural justice, that when you fight an adversary, there must be level playing field between the two. We come to Mahabharata and the incident which all of us from childhood are so familiar, and it is a part of our consciousness in some form or the other. That is Draupadi's jurisprudential plea. I repeat that I am using words deliberately to connect it with what we are facing every day in courts. So Draupadi's jurisprudential plea that when she was being staked in and lost, and Yudhishthir lost in the dice game against the Kauravas in the court, Draupadi was dragged into the Kauravas assembly by Dushasana at the order of Duryodhana, and rather than weeping or pleading, Draupadi made a precise jurisprudential question to the entire assembly, and I am just using it within quotation marks. If the king had already lost himself first, by what right did he stake me? Let the Kurus speak the law. Let them give an answer. Draupadi also questioned, a king who has himself been reduced to slavery, who has accepted bondage as his own condition, by what law can such a man then stake his wife? If this is to be decided by dharma, let the entire assembly answer this question. So I just wanted to, because when I was reading this, I felt goosebumps. I felt a kind of an inner fire that all the legal concepts which we discuss now in courts, we look back centuries, we look back into our Vedas, we look back into our mythological stories, the Ramayana, Mahabharata, and we find answers there. All these judicial concepts we find can be traced back to these stories. So I go to my second chapter, which is early struggles from exclusion to entry. And of course, we are all aware that women have historically faced so many barriers when it came to not only participating as professionals, as lawyers in courts, but also with regard to the perception, with regard to when the president very rightly told us that what is required is the perception, is the equality, is the change of mindset. So, and law somehow was always perceived of as a very male, quote unquote, male profession, male preserve, where women were thought to be somehow inadequate, not only in terms of their capacity for hard work, but also their capacity of understanding a legal problem, their capacity of articulating what they felt, and their capacity to write, to articulate their thoughts in terms of a written judgment. So somehow women always were looked upon as unequal to men, where women in the legal profession was somehow the weaker sex, and the men were the stronger sex, because legal profession itself was looked upon as a male preserve. Now, when in India, formal education in the stream of law was introduced as early as in 1855, 1856, 1857, with establishment of universities with law departments in the University of Calcutta, in the University of Bombay, and the University of Madras. And the University of Calcutta was actually established in 1855, and this was before India gained independence from British rule, which was much later, 1947. And in those days, the legal profession in India was treated as a man's area. And before the year 1923, while women could study law, they were kind of, there was no bar on women from studying law, but they were not allowed to enroll as advocates. And the singular reason for their disqualification of women enrolling as advocates was only their gender. That means only the fact that they were women. So you can see the dichotomy. So while they could study as lawyers, they could become lawyers, they could not be enrolled as advocates. So there were some notable women, even as far back as in the middle 19th century, we are talking of 1856, 1857, that women like Regina Guha, Sudhanshu Bala Hazra, and Cornelia Sorabji had to fight a very hard and protracted legal battle by way of a social movement, not only their personal battle, but also they kind of took other women in that battle and made it a social movement, and which led ultimately to the promulgation of the Legal Practitioners Women's Act 1923. That act entitled women for the first time not only to be admitted, but also to be enrolled as legal practitioners. But even after being admitted into the legal arena, the presence of women was actually extremely negligible till the 20th century. The step forward when women started becoming visible, when their voices started becoming heard for the first time in the 20th century, we had Cornelia Sorabji. And my favorite quote, my personal favorite quote from Cornelia Sorabji is, "When the doors were closed, she didn't knock on them, she broke them down." So that is a very inspiring quote. And Cornelia Sorabji, as you all know, was the first woman to pass the civil law examinations in the UK in 1892. But despite passing the bar as far back as in 1892, she was not allowed to plead before the Allahabad High Court, because at that point of time, the legal profession was only restricted to men, not women. 24 years later, or at least in 1916, that's not 24, that is much later probably, in 1916, Regina Guha's enrollment application was rejected by a bench of 5 judges in the Calcutta High Court. And the Calcutta High Court in 1916 gave the reason for rejecting Regina Guha's application for enrollment to the bar, saying that as the law stands, this is within quotation marks, I just took it from the judgment, as the law stands, a woman cannot be enrolled as a pleader. The judges actually wrote this. And legal practice then was governed by the Legal Practitioners Act of 1879, and Section 5 of that Act said that no person shall appear, plead or act as a pleader unless he has been admitted and enrolled, while the Act of 1879 did not contain an explicit bar against women from becoming pleaders. There was no mention. The Act continued as he. You can of course argue that under the General Clauses Act, he would also include she, but as it stood, the Calcutta High Court 5-judge bench rejected Regina Guha's application. And around that time, a larger movement for women's rights in the legal profession was also gaining momentum in other parts of India, even though Calcutta High Court had rejected it. In other parts of India, there was a momentum which was happening for women's rights. And in 1923, we finally had the Legal Practitioners Women's Act being promulgated. So I will, yes, and I can't miss out on Sudhanshu Bala Hazra, who was also an Indian lawyer who fought a notable case and campaigned to enable women in India to enroll as lawyers. We also had Anna Chandy from Kerala, who became India's first woman judge in 1937. Violet Alva in 1944 was the first woman advocate to argue before a full bench of the High Court in 1959. And Anna Chandy also became a High Court judge later on. And it took another 30 years for the Supreme Court to see its first woman judge, Justice Fatima Bibi, assuming office on 6th of October 1989. And Justice Fatima Bibi, if my memory serves me correctly, actually said somewhere that I opened a closed door. So what is the contemporary landscape now? This is my last section. What is the contemporary landscape now? Where do women stand today? In the legal education, we have a remarkable rise in the number of students preferring to take up a career in law as a conscious career option. So there is no compulsion on them. It's a free choice. They want to become lawyers, so they must be aware and confident that India now is not only encourages, but actually has opened its doors fully to women advocates. And a survey conducted of the higher education in 2019-2020, which is about 6 years back, and published by the Ministry of Education, Government of India, in 2020, it says that out of 432,000 students who had enrolled in the stream of law, 33% were women. There was a slight improvement of this 33% in 2013, when 31.9% of women, there was an improvement from 2013 to 2020. In 2013, we had 31.9%, which increased to 33% in 2020. So that was quite a shift. And the total metric number of LLB graduates, female graduates, were 40,000 to 45,000, which is about 45%. And the law enrollment of female graduates was 49%, which is almost 50% in the top 30 law colleges of India today. And in the last 6 years, which is from 2018 to 2019, and again from 2023 to 2024, the highest percentage was 39% of women getting into law schools and enrolling. I also took out the data of NLSU Bangalore, Delhi, Nalsar, Hyderabad, and the percentage of women's presence. And in Bangalore from 23 to 24, there's a slight dip from 39% to 38%. In Delhi, it's up from 41 to 43%. Nalsar, Hyderabad remains the same at 46%. NUJS Kolkata, there is a big jump from 33% to 46%, and NLU Gujarat, more or less 46 to 45%. In the legal profession, the data tabled by the Law Ministry in the Indian Parliament on 29 July 2022, collating information from 24 state bar councils in respect of the total number of lawyers and the number of women lawyers, revealed that 15.3% of lawyers in India are women. And representation of women lawyers in the executive council of the state bar councils somehow needs improvement, but this is a great news to celebrate that in Telangana, we have today 5 women advocates who have been elected as the state bar council members through their own determination, effort and perseverance. And a recent study in one of the legal portals conducted online states that only 2.04% of the state bar councils across India are women, which means that out of 441 representatives of 18 state bar councils, about 9 are women. And as early as in 2023, there were 284,507, that's about 284,000 women advocates registered with bar councils across 15 states in India. So with regard to the judiciary, because there are so many of my very distinguished colleagues here, I must also point out that the number of women judges in India currently is